Joining us now is Adenike Adeyemi, who is the Vice Chairman of the Central Organizing Committee for the 29th Nigerian Economic Summit. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so it's the 29th edition
Yes.
of this talk show up about how to drive Nigeria's economy. Talk to us about the theme for this particular event. I mean, what exactly is the issue around the pathway to economic transformation? You talk about inclusion and all of that. Help expatiate on that.
Yes, thank you for your question. I think first of all is to start to say that this is the most consistent non-stop platform over the last 29 to 30 years that has brought together leading private sector, development sector, even donor partners into one space to discuss and agree on agenda setting priorities for the following year. What also makes this year also crucial and also timely is that we have a new administration coming in. Right. They've set forth an 8-point agenda. And what we're doing this year, as we've done in other summits, is to bring people together to say, okay, how do we then drive the kind of growth that we see, we desire, and we also see in the potential? With respect to the theme, we deliberated on the theme and we're looking at pathways to economic transformation and inclusion to say how do we achieve macroeconomic stability, how do we ensure national cohesion, how do we ensure that there is job creation, massive job creation, to look at things around labor, unemployment, productivity, particularly because of our very agile youth population. How do we also ensure subnational competitiveness, to make sure that we harness the potential, not just at the center, but also with the potential competitive advantages of our subnational economies with that. So over the course of today and tomorrow, through 8 plenaries, different interactive panels, we're going to we're disaggregating a lot of these conversations. And you mentioned talk shop, but the idea is that so many of us are experts in different things and in different ways. And so bringing people together to say, this is what we want to achieve at the end of the day. The chairman talked about the potential to achieve a $3 to $4 trillion economy in the next 10 years, which we believe it's possible, but it can only be possible with certain foundations in place that is then intentionally driven with the right leadership to then take us there.
I like to run away from cliches, which is, for instance, talk shops. I've actually covered and followed Nigeria Economic Summit, group. But the thing here is about listening to you and listening to the panelists and the panel sessions, and ultimately your report comes out.
Yes.
So what have we gathered so far in previous editions to the extent that Nigeria is where it is at the moment?
Fantastic. So I think 2 things to understand that what the NESG does is bring people together in the summit once a year, but what happens is the work that happens in between the summit sessions. So the way the NESG is structured, you have policy commissions, roundtables, committees of practice that are distributed alongside industries and certain focus areas. So one of the things that happened today was the launch of the NS Shonekov Center for Legislative Reforms that used to be, that was the next level of what was the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable, which was very crucial in facilitating the passage of the CAMA 2020 Act, which is the Company and Allied Matters Act. Again, making sure that there's an easier regulatory environment to be able to start, build, sustain, and structure a business within the Nigerian space. So that and many more are the different types of things that come out from this conversation. I moderated the session today around fostering inclusive growth, looking at the creative sector, but also looking at the role of technology and entrepreneurship, which is very critical to job creation, economic development, and productivity at a lot. And a lot of the conversations focused on the challenges in the education sector, that if we need to rethink the way the education sector is, if we want to have youth that are skilled and are skilled for the type of labor market we'll need for, the kind of growth that we need. But we take that as a recommendation, and then it then goes to say, okay, how do we work with the, for instance, National Universities Commission? Yeah. How do we work to ensure teacher quality and teacher standards assurance? Do we even have the right curriculum that also sets us on the path, on these pathways that we're also discussing? So a lot of the work that happens in between the summit, but also partnering with the public sector. So this is done with the NESG and the Minister for Budget and Economic Planning to then take on a lot of these recommendations and working with the relevant ministries, departments and agencies in between the summit.
Now, two layers here. When you look back at the 29 years that you've been coming up with these recommendations and what have you, how would you say that your recommendations have impacted on the state of Nigeria, whether it's economic, socioeconomic impact that it's had over time? And these recommendations, in all sincerity, to what extent really would you, describe the response, whether from the public sector or the private sector? I mean, how welcoming, especially in the public sector,
Well, I think first of all that we're doing it in partnership with the Ministry of Budget is first of all a good sign, because this is not just the private sector, people from private sector coming in and say this is what you should do. This is also an understanding of what has been done to date. Can we get a sense of, the challenges you face? This is our recommendations. We want to have part of the pathways that, the chairman and the NESG is promoting is to have a viable investment climate to attract domestic and foreign direct investment. And private sector is very important because they want to know that the dollars that are invested here translate to the right returns, and they can also repatriate their money or get that back. But in those conversations is also working with government to understand their priorities around monetary and fiscal policy, to also have an alignment in those particular kind of conversations. So that's one. It's not just a one-sided thing. It's a two-sided thing. But you also have development partners. There was a very heavy presence of the international community also here, because some private partners here are also from, outside of Nigeria who are investing internally. But also the importance of Nigeria within the regional and the global economic market and the unachieved potential that we've seen. So there's that partnership. But then there are the different layers of examples of how those conversations have also necessitated recommendations that have said, for instance, we have a lot of agencies that were not at some point not even speaking to each other in different ways. What do we need to do? We need to have a particular responsible agency within the government that is responsible for enabling business environment. And so I think about 6 to 7 years ago, that recommendation came, which subsequently led to what we see as PEBEC now. Right. So those are the things that happen. The conversations, the recommendations are then taken to the policy commissions that are in charge of that. They work with the relevant ministries, departments and agencies that hopefully then translate to, the kind of actions that will then allow us to transition the conversations.
Let me quickly throw this in, if we can do this in a minute. The creative sector, which you also moderated, give us a sense of what Nigerians should expect, because that's a very big, boisterous, vibrant sector.
So on the one hand, you see the creative sector. If you look at the sectors that are putting us on the map now, it's creative and technology, and it's young people. And they're doing it despite the system, despite the environment, despite the challenges. So you can even imagine when there is the enabling environment to allow them to do this. And so there are different things we spoke about. We first of all said that, we need to find a way to even understand the different opportunities in the value chain and allow people, particularly young people, to come into the space and play across it. We're at a time where there's a Nigerian vibe everywhere: food, clothing, fashion, music,
I like the
movies.
fact that you call it vibe.
But it is everywhere, and there's that strong appreciation. But how do we harness it? Because the people that are benefiting from it now are not necessarily Nigerians. It's other people understanding those opportunities and then reaping from that investment.
Spot on.
Right. I hope young people are part of the NESG that you have.
Yes, we actually have a committee of practice for young people.
Great.
There.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.